BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast, where farmers say they fear the rise in violent encounters with illegal hare courses could result in someone being killed.
There's been a huge increase in their willingness to commit violence to farmers, gamekeepers, anybody that tries to stop them doing what they do. In the old days, they used to run away. Now they run towards you.
We'll have more on that a little later. First today, a new study has found that after 4 years of applying sewage sludge to farmland, the amount of microplastics in the soil had risen by 1,450%. The research was carried out by the James Hutton Institute and Robert Gordon University in Aberdeenshire. It looked at soil samples from an experimental field in North Lanarkshire. Microplastics are pieces of plastic measuring less than 5 millimetres in size. They're present in products like cosmetics, or they're formed by breaking off from larger pieces of plastic. Dr. Stuart Ramage, an analytical chemist at the James Hutton Institute, told me they get into sewage sludge from wastewater.
So in sewage sludges, it's through wastewater streams. So for instance, when you wash your clothes in the washing machine, the tumble dryer, that then gets flushed through to the sewage sludge treatment works, and typically there isn't any process to remove them from the sludge itself. There is processes to remove as much microplastics as possible from the wastewater, but in the sewage sludge they typically just accumulate there.
And what then is the matter with it? Is it a problem?
Microplastic can affect a wide variety of things, so from soil health, so it can affect the physical and chemical properties of soil, such as your pH or your water retention. It can also affect microbial function, so it can have impacts on nutrient cycling, for example, and all this has impacts then on plant growth, root development, uptake of nutrients, and of course this can then feed up the food chain from plants to animals and potentially into humans. For an example, earthworms, they can ingest plastics and that remains in their guts, which can then be eaten by birds, for example, and again, as you go up the food chain, it basically keeps bioaccumulating.
And what about when the plant is growing? Does it ever take up plastic?
So there has been some studies which have reported seeing very small microplastics, or what we then call nanoplastics, which are very, very tiny pieces of plastics that could potentially be uptaken through the roots.
Does it ever get to the leaves or the fruit? Would we be eating micro or nanoplastics from plants which have been taking up nanoplastics from the soil?
So there is evidence to suggest potentially in fruits that there is microplastics present, whether that's through things like packaging or films used on agricultural soils to promote growth, or whether that's through the uptake of plastics from the plant itself remains unknown.
You were looking specifically at a site that had had sewage sludge put on it specifically, but how widespread is sewage sludge used across the country, and how widespread do you think microplastics are in the soil?
So sewage sludges are used up and down the length of the UK, and even if you apply a little for a short time or a lot over the course of a long period, microplastics will be just continuously accumulating in the soil environment, and so agricultural soils are becoming a big hotspot for microplastics.
Dr. Stuart Ramage from the James Hutton Institute. This week we're looking at biosecurity, the work to mitigate against pests and diseases in livestock and plants. As well as biosecurity measures in place on UK farms, border controls are also vital in keeping out unwanted disease. For ornamental plants, many of which are imported, there are a number of threats. One is Xylella, a bacterial infection spread by insects which affects the circulation of plants' xylem fluid. It's had serious impacts on olive trees in the Mediterranean. The disease hasn't arrived in the UK yet, but scientists at the John Innes Centre in Norwich have been working to find out more about the bug that carries the disease and predict how quickly Xylella might spread if it were to get through border controls. I joined research scientist Dr. Sam Mugford in the high-security insect lab to find out more. I'm going to get togged up with a visitor's robe here.
So you can see in this zone we've got a black room with some UV lighting that zaps the bugs. If they should escape this far, they will get wiped out by the zapper up there.
So we've come into the lab itself now, and Sam Mugford has managed to set up a microscope with a nice big screen, so we get a large picture of the offending insect that spreads Xylella.
These bugs, the froghoppers or spittlebugs, they feed from plant sap. They pick up the bacteria and they move it from plant to plant, and that's how the disease spreads. And it's key to point out that these insects are native to the UK. They're very common, they're absolutely not a problem, and they don't do any harm to our native plants or crops. They only become a problem if the disease is around and they're able to transmit it.
If the disease got into the UK, what sorts of plants could it get into through this bug?
We think the most likely route for it to come in through would be through imported plants. So rosemary, lavender, other ornamental plants, oleander, coffee plants, lots of native trees. Oak trees can be infected, as well as a lot of other woody plants.
Making sure the disease doesn't get in is the job of the UK's Chief Plant Health Officer, Professor Nicola Spence. She told me they are doing as much as they can at the border.
Because Xylella is such high risk, we have 100% checks on Xylella hosts that come through our borders. We're checking the documents, and then we can notify a consignment that has to report for a physical inspection. We can take samples if we've got any suspicions, and then we're also checking that they're coming with a phytosanitary certificate which explains and assures us that they have not come from an area where Xylella is present.
We heard from the scientists there that the froghoppers are widely distributed across the country, and if it was actually out in the environment, I presume it would be quite hard to control. How would you do that?
So you're right, we have plenty of host plants here in the UK, and we've got plenty of vectors. So if we intercepted Xylella, then there would be various destruction of the infested consignments. We'd do tracing exercises. And then in the event of an actual outbreak somewhere, either a nursery or in the wider environment, we would set up demarcated areas. We would have destruction, restriction of movements of plants, and also surveillance, sampling, testing and checking. So it would be a massive effort.
Professor Nicola Spence. Back in the lab, the research team have been working out how easily the disease could spread if it did get here. And there's some good news.
Firstly, we found the froghoppers do not move as far or as fast in the UK as they do in Italy. Interestingly, we found there might be some corridors of movement and other geographical barriers to movement. And so that might inform any policy on quarantine at a much more fine-grained level, because we might be able to say, for example, that they were quite likely to move quite a lot in the southeast of England, but if an infection was detected in the northwest, they might be rather less mobile.
Dr. Sam Mugford from the John Innes Centre. Farmers who've had illegal hare coursers on their land are warning it's only a matter of time until someone is killed. Hare coursing involves betting on dogs chasing hares. Many of those taking part will drive across fields and access the countryside at night. Police say those taking part are often part of criminal gangs who are using more extreme tactics. The last government strengthened laws against hare coursing, and the Sentencing Council is currently consulting on the guidelines for what sentences people should face. It's hard to judge the true scale of the problem, but many rural communities worry that it's getting worse. Dan O'Brien from the BBC South Investigations Unit reports he spoke first to David, a farmer on the Wiltshire-Hampshire border.
We get visited by hare coursers probably every other day. There's been a huge increase in their willingness to commit violence to farmers, gamekeepers, anybody that tries to stop them doing what they do. That's a classic example of wheel marks there. This is where they've just trashed the hedge. They've driven straight through the hedge to our left. They're in hot pursuit of a hare that's come through a hedge, so we'll just smash the hedge out of the way. I mean, I was lucky in this situation. So there were 5 people in the car, 4 of them wearing balaclavas. They taped over the number plate, and I'm going to guess, 10-year-old kid sat in the middle of the back seat.
How dare people come and do this to our business, to our home?
Just off Salisbury Plain, this farmer and his wife have invested in extra security cameras. They want to remain anonymous after a terrifying incident late one night when a hare-coursing gang turned up.
Oh, farmer boys, farmer.
This video of the attack was posted on social media.
Get straight to him. Oh, he got some sport now, and he...
The couple were quickly surrounded by half a dozen vehicles. The farmer got out to confront the gang. All the while, the gang were firing ball bearings from slingshots, smashing out the car windows.
Don't need it, boys! Leave it, boys!
The farmer and his wife made a getaway, while the gang disappeared into the night.
You were on the phone to the police and you screamed at me to get back in the car.
They're ramming.
And they rammed us.
They rammed us at least 2 or 3 times.
One man was arrested and later released over a traffic offence, but with fake number plates and no faces to identify. Others got away. This couple are full of praise for the rural police officers, but say there are far too few of them.
When someone screams down the phone at 999, hare coursing is going on, it is not some old boy with a dog. It is serious crime.
People would quite happily wipe you off the face of the earth without a backward glance.
Police forces across the country are seeing hare-coursing gangs getting more organised, the betting rings and sale of the dogs reaching tens of thousands of pounds a turn.
I mean, that guy's got to think my life's over. They're so vulnerable, aren't they? And this is the thing, they're doubling down on the tactics that they use.
I showed the video of that incident to Chief Inspector Kevin Lax-Kelly. He heads up the National Wildlife Crime Unit and chairs Interpol's Wildlife Crime Response.
That crime that they're committing is far more extreme than it was 20 years ago. Hare coursing has been around a long time. It's been there all of my policing service. And what we're seeing is when the response improves, the tactics that the criminals are using improves. These are criminals that do criminal things, and in their pastime, this is their sport of choice. It's really clear that there is money exchanging. We've seen in recent investigations the value of dogs are significant, tens and tens of thousands of pounds. The money that's been exchanged in some of the localised competition that's been born within this underworld of hare coursing, eye-watering. It's beyond people's yearly salaries.
There are things farmers can do to protect themselves. This digger is making a ditch hundreds of metres long on David's farm, making it harder to access the fields from the road. But communities can help too, by sharing information and reporting suspicions to police. Claire Wright is from the Country Land and Business Association, which represents thousands of people in the rural economy.
We've had members in the past who have been beaten up. One had his nose broken with an iron bar and he just got in the way accidentally. The coursers thought that he was preventing them from getting on with their sport and he ended up with a broken nose for his trouble. This is the reality of what rural communities are dealing with and they're terrified.
Back on David's farm, it's time for his nightly security check, once again never quite knowing what he's heading into.
I'm just off to do my rounds.
OK, please be careful.
Will do.
At the top of the hill we get out to check the locks on the gates, so often smashed through. At nightfall this beautiful landscape is total darkness. The car headlamps the only obvious light that we can see for miles.
You are absolutely on your own out here.
So if stuff kicks off here, you've got to weigh that up, haven't you? You are isolated and it's just you.
It's just you. In the old days they used to run away, now they run towards you. This is going to end in a mess and I genuinely think someone's going to be, dare I say, killed.
Farmer David there, ending that report from Dan O'Brien. That's all from us today. I'm Anna Hill. The producer is Heather Simons. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.